Cowboy expected a plain bride, but the black woman who arrived shocked him. The weathered rancher's jaw dropped as the elegant woman stepped from the dusty stagecoach, her presence silencing the bustling frontier town. Hostile whispers followed her every step. The townsfolk saw nothing but trouble wrapped in traveling clothes, an outsider destined to be driven out by winter's harsh reality or their own cruelty. They assumed she'd flee within days, another broken dream swallowed by the unforgiving West. But the desperate cattleman needed salvation for his dying ranch, and this mysterious woman carried secrets that could transform his barren land into prosperity. What he didn't know was that her past held both the power to save them and the danger to destroy everything they might build together. Would her hidden truth become their redemption, or would it bring enemies that would tear apart any chance of survival? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The Colorado sun beat down mercilessly on Lawson Hargrove's withered cattle. 3 years of drought had turned his once thriving ranch into a graveyard of cracked earth and dying dreams. He knelt beside a fallen calf, its ribs visible through matted hide. The animal's labored breathing matched his own desperation. His neighbors had given up months ago. Clayton Wade's prosperous spread next door served as a daily reminder of Lawson's failures. Wade's men rode past regularly, their laughter carrying on the dry wind. They whispered about the cursed Hargrove land, about a man too broken to save himself. Lawson's wife Martha had died 2 winters past. The fever took her quick, but the loneliness lingered like smoke. He'd sealed himself away from the world, pouring everything into keeping the ranch alive. Now even that was slipping through his fingers like desert sand. The bank notice crumpled in his pocket reminded him of the deadline. 2 months to settle his debts or lose everything Martha had loved. The thought of strangers walking through their home, selling off their dreams piece by piece, made his chest tight. He tried hiring help, but no decent man wanted to work a failing ranch. The few drifters who answered his calls took his money and disappeared within days. Desperation drove him to places he'd never imagined going. The mail-order bride advertisement felt like surrendering his last shred of pride. He'd written and rewritten it a dozen times, each version sounding more pathetic than the last. Finally, he'd settled on simple honesty. He needed a practical woman, someone plain and hardworking who wouldn't expect romance or fancy promises. Someone who understood that survival came before sentiment. The general store buzzed with gossip when he posted the notice. Martha Jennings whispered behind her hand to other customers. Sheriff Collins shook his head with obvious pity. Even the preacher offered unsolicited advice about grieving properly. Clayton Wade cornered him outside the post office. The man's expensive boots and silver belt buckle spoke of success Lawson could barely remember. "You sure this is wise, Hargrove? Bringing some desperate woman to that cursed land?" Lawson ignored him and mounted his horse. Wade's laughter followed him down the dusty street. Weeks passed with no response. Lawson threw himself into ranch work, patching fences that barely contained his shrinking herd. The water hole had dropped to mud. His vegetable garden produced stunted, bitter crops. Every morning brought fresh evidence of his failures. When the letter finally arrived, his hands trembled opening it. The woman's penmanship was neat, educated. She agreed to his terms and would arrive on the Thursday stagecoach. Her name was Sophia Reed. She mentioned traveling from back east but gave few details about her background. Lawson spent 3 days cleaning the house. He aired out Martha's old dresses, wondering if they'd fit his bride. The mirror showed him a man aged beyond his 32 years. Sun and worry had carved deep lines around his eyes. His hands bore the permanent stains of hard labor. Thursday morning found him pacing the depot platform. The stagecoach was late, giving him too much time to imagine what kind of woman would answer such an advertisement. Probably desperate herself, maybe widowed or too plain to find a husband through normal means. That suited him fine. He needed a work partner, not a beauty who'd complicate his already difficult life. The stage finally appeared through the dust, its horses lathered and tired. Other townspeople gathered to see who might emerge. News traveled fast in Cedar Ridge, and everyone knew about Lawson's mail-order bride. The driver climbed down and began unloading luggage. A drummer stepped out first, followed by an elderly woman visiting family. Lawson's stomach knotted as he waited. Then she appeared. Sophia Reed was nothing like he'd imagined. She stepped gracefully from the coach, her traveling dress crisp despite the long journey. Her dark skin gleamed in the afternoon sun. She carried herself with quiet dignity, scanning the crowd with intelligent brown eyes. The platform fell silent. Lawson felt every gaze shift between him and the woman. His mouth went dry as understanding dawned on the gathered faces. Whispers started immediately, growing louder by the second. Sophia's eyes found his. She stepped forward with calm confidence, extending her hand. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm Miss Reed." Her voice carried education and refinement. Lawson took her hand automatically, his mind struggling to process this impossible situation. He'd expected plain and practical. He'd gotten elegant and mysterious. Clayton Wade pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with disgust. Other men followed, their expressions ranging from shock to anger. The women pulled their skirts aside as Sophia passed, their whispers turning cruel. Lawson realized every person on that platform was staring at him, waiting for his reaction. His decision in the next few moments would determine both their fates. The woman beside him stood perfectly still, her dignity intact despite the obvious hostility surrounding them. His failing ranch needed help desperately, but bringing this woman home would make him an outcast in his own town. The choice would change everything, and there was no going back. The wagon ride to the ranch stretched in uncomfortable silence. Sophia sat straight-backed beside Lawson, her hands folded in her lap. She watched the barren landscape roll past without comment. The dying cattle and withered crops told the story of his desperation better than words ever could. Lawson stole glances at her profile. Her calm composure unnerved him more than tears or complaints would have. Any reasonable woman would demand to be taken back to town immediately. Yet she studied his failing ranch with the focus of someone taking inventory. The house looked smaller and shabbier than he remembered, paint peeled from the shutters. The porch sagged on one side. Sophia climbed down from the wagon and smoothed her skirts, treating the humble dwelling like a palace. "The arrangement stands as written in your letter." Her directness surprised him. "Room, board, and a small wage for helping with ranch work." "Then I accept." She lifted her single bag and walked toward the house. Lawson followed, uncertain whether to feel relieved or terrified. The next morning brought fresh disasters. 3 more cattle had died overnight. The vegetable garden showed signs of some blight he couldn't identify. Worse, the general store refused to deliver his usual supplies. Martha Jennings had made it clear that decent folk wouldn't do business with his household anymore. Sophia emerged from the house wearing a simple work dress. She'd pinned her hair back severely and rolled up her sleeves. Without a word, she began examining the dead cattle, lifting their eyelids and checking their mouths with clinical precision. "When did the death start?" 2 weeks ago. Lost 12 head so far." She moved to the surviving animals, running her hands along their flanks and necks. Several cattle that had seemed healthy yesterday now appeared listless. She spent an hour methodically examining the herd while Lawson watched in confusion. The crisis came that afternoon. Thunder, his prize bull and the foundation of his breeding program, collapsed in the pasture. The massive animal lay on his side, foam flecking his muzzle. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Lawson ran toward town, desperate to fetch the veterinarian. Doc Peterson had treated ranch animals for 20 years. Surely he'd make an exception for such an emergency. He found Peterson outside his office, loading supplies into his wagon. The older man's face hardened when he saw Lawson approaching. "Don't bother asking. I won't set foot on your place while that woman's there. Thunder's dying. He's worth more than my whole herd combined. Should have thought of that before you brought shame to this town." Peterson climbed onto his wagon and drove away. Lawson stood in the dusty street, watching his last hope disappear. Other townspeople emerged from shops and doorways, their faces showing mixture of pity and satisfaction. He rode back to the ranch expecting to find Thunder dead. Instead, Sophia knelt beside the bull with her sleeves rolled higher. She'd opened a leather satchel filled with glass vials and metal instruments. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, drawing blood samples and examining the animal's eyes. "Hold his head steady." Lawson dropped to his knees, cradling Thunder's massive head in his lap. The bull's breathing had worsened. Foam turned pink with blood. Sophia filled a syringe from one of her vials. She found a vein in Thunder's neck and injected the contents with steady hands. Then she prepared a second injection, this one larger. "What are you doing?" "Saving your bull." She administered the second injection, then began mixing something in a metal cup. The liquid smelled sharp and medicinal. She poured it down Thunder's throat while Lawson held the animal's mouth open. "You need to move the entire herd to the north pasture immediately. Burn everything in this field. The water trough, the feed, all of it." "How do you know what's wrong with him?" "Because I'm a veterinarian." The words hit him like a physical blow. He stared at her calm face, trying to process this impossible revelation. "That's not possible. I studied at the Boston College of Veterinary Medicine, graduated top of my class 3 years ago." She continued working as she spoke, checking Thunder's pulse and breathing. The bull's gasping had eased slightly. Color returned to his gums. "I came west because Eastern society wouldn't let me practice freely. Too many barriers. Too many men who couldn't accept a woman with medical training." Lawson's mind raced. He'd advertised for a plain farm wife and received a trained professional. The irony would have been funny if his entire future hadn't hung in the balance. "Your herd has ergot poisoning from contaminated grain. Without treatment, you'll lose them all within a week." Thunder's breathing steadied. The foam around his muzzle cleared. His eyes lost their glassy, panicked look. "The injections will counteract the poison, but you need to change their diet completely and disinfect everything they've touched." She packed her instruments back into the leather satchel. Lawson noticed her hands remained perfectly steady despite what she'd just accomplished. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Boston General Hospital. I worked there 2 years before heading west." Thunder lifted his head and looked around. The improvement seemed miraculous. An hour ago the bull had been dying. Now he struggled to his feet, shaky but alive. Word spread quickly through town. By evening, 3 neighbors had ridden over to see the recovered bull with their own eyes. They found Sophia directing the burning of contaminated feed while Lawson moved his herd to clean pasture. She'd saved not just Thunder, but identified the poison threatening his entire operation. The woman he'd expected to be a burden had become his salvation. Sophia transformed the ranch within weeks. She implemented rotational grazing patterns that allowed overworked pastures to recover. The surviving cattle grew stronger on fresh grass and clean water. She identified mineral deficiencies in the soil and suggested amendments that would improve crop yields. Lawson watched her work with growing amazement. She approached every problem with scientific precision. Her leather journal filled with notes about soil composition, weather patterns, and animal behavior. She treated ranching like medicine, diagnosing problems and prescribing solutions. The drought had damaged more than just his land. Years of poor practices had depleted the soil and contaminated water sources. Sophia showed him how to dig proper drainage ditches and rotate crops to restore nutrients. She designed a water conservation system that caught and stored every precious drop of rain. Her veterinary skills proved invaluable beyond Thunder's recovery. She treated a neighbor's horse for colic when Doc Peterson was out of town. Word spread quietly among the ranchers. Several began asking discreet questions about their livestock problems. Martha Jennings was the first to approach directly. Her milk cow had stopped producing after a difficult calving. She arrived at dawn, looking around nervously before knocking on the door. "I heard what she did for your bull." Sophia examined the cow without fanfare. She diagnosed retained placenta and administered treatment that had the animal producing milk within days. Martha left a basket of fresh bread on the porch as payment. The preacher's wife came next. Her prize rooster had developed a strange limp that threatened his ability to service the hens. Sophia's examination revealed a simple nutritional deficiency. A change in diet restored the bird's vigor completely. Clayton Wade noticed the increased activity around Lawson's ranch. He rode over one afternoon, his face dark with suspicion. He found Sophia treating a neighbor's sheep for parasites while Lawson repaired fence posts nearby. Folks are saying she's some kind of animal doctor. She knows her business. No woman knows doctoring, especially not her kind. Lawson's hands tightened on the fence post. Her kind saved my herd when your friend Peterson wouldn't come. Wade's voice turned threatening. You're making a mistake, Hargrove. This town won't stand for it much longer. That night, someone cut the fence around Lawson's north pasture. Cattle wandered onto the road, creating chaos until dawn. Sophia examined the wire cuts and declared them too clean to be accidental. Someone had used proper tools and taken time to ensure maximum damage. 2 days later, feed sacks in the barn showed signs of tampering. Sophia tested samples and found traces of salt deliberately mixed into the grain. Too much salt would have sickened the entire herd. Only her careful inspection prevented disaster. The harassment escalated gradually. Tools disappeared from the barn. Gates were left open. Strange noises spooked the cattle at night. Sophia documented everything in her journal, noting patterns that suggested organized sabotage rather than random mischief. Lawson's anger grew with each incident. He'd expected social disapproval but not deliberate sabotage. These weren't pranks or warnings. Someone wanted to destroy his ranch completely. The confrontation came on a Saturday morning. Wade arrived with 5 other ranchers, their faces grim with purpose. They found Lawson and Sophia working together to repair storm damage from the previous night's rain. We've come to talk sense into you, Hargrove. Then you've wasted your time. This has gone too far. She's got half the county thinking she's some kind of miracle worker. Sophia continued working, her face calm despite the obvious hostility. She'd learned to ignore such confrontations during her years in Boston. Men like Wade existed everywhere, threatened by competence they couldn't understand or control. Look at what she's accomplished here, Lawson said. My cattle are healthy. My land is recovering. That's more than any of you managed during the drought. It's not natural. Women don't doctor animals, and women like her certainly don't tell white men how to run their ranches. The words hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire. Lawson felt something shift inside him, a line being crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. She saved more animals in 2 months than Peterson has all year. If that threatens you, the problem isn't with her. Wade's face reddened. You're choosing her over your own kind. I'm choosing competence over prejudice. Then you're a fool. This town won't tolerate much more of this nonsense. The town can go to hell. The words surprised Lawson as much as they did Wade. He'd never spoken so boldly, never taken such a definitive stand. But something about Sophia's quiet dignity in the face of hostility had awakened his own courage. Wade's group exchanged glances. They'd expected him to cave under pressure, to send Sophia away rather than face community rejection. His defiance changed the equation completely. You'll regret this, Hargrove. Mark my words. They rode away in silence, leaving dust and implied threats hanging in the morning air. Sophia finally looked up from her work, meeting Lawson's eyes directly. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple. For the first time since Martha's death, Lawson felt something other than grief and desperation. The ranch showed signs of recovery. The woman beside him had brought both healing and hope, but Wade's warning echoed in his mind. The confrontation had drawn battle lines neither of them could erase. Whatever came next would test both their resolve and their rapidly deepening partnership. The stakes had risen beyond simple survival. Now they faced a choice between safety and principle, between conformity and courage. The letters arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous postal clerk who wouldn't meet Sophia's eyes. She recognized the official Denver postmark immediately. Her hands trembled as she tucked the envelope inside her apron, away from Lawson's curious gaze. She waited until evening to read it in the privacy of her room. The letter bore the letterhead of the Denver Tribune, Colorado's most respected newspaper. They'd been investigating her former employer, Dr. Marcus Whitmore, following tips from several sources in Boston. The investigation had uncovered years of academic fraud. Whitmore had built his reputation stealing research from students and colleagues, particularly women who couldn't challenge him publicly. The theft charges against Sophia had been fabricated to silence her when she'd threatened to expose his plagiarism. A second letter contained even more shocking news. The Tribune wanted to publish her veterinary research under her own name. They offered her a position as their first female science correspondent, documenting agricultural innovations across the Colorado Territory. Sophia stared at the papers until the words blurred. Everything she dreamed of was finally within reach. Recognition for her work, professional vindication, a chance to practice her skills without hiding or making excuses. But accepting meant leaving the ranch, leaving Lawson. The sabotage intensified that same week. Someone poisoned the well water with salt, forcing them to haul fresh water from the creek. Feed bags were slashed open, spilling grain across the barn floor. Gate hinges were loosened so cattle could push through and scatter. Sophia approached each incident like a medical case, documenting evidence and analyzing patterns. The perpetrators worked systematically, targeting different aspects of the operation each night. They knew ranching well enough to cause maximum disruption without obvious destruction. "It's not random vandalism," she told Lawson over breakfast. "Someone's trying to make the ranch fail slowly. Wade's behind it, has to be. Can you prove it?" Lawson's silence answered her question. In a small town, everyone knew everyone else's business, but knowing and proving were different things entirely. The harassment affected their neighbors too. Martha Jennings faced boycotts from customers who disapproved of her friendship with Sophia. The preacher received complaints about allowing them to attend Sunday services. Even Dr. Peterson felt pressure for his refusal to treat Lawson's animals. Sophia's evening treatments of neighborhood livestock continued despite the controversy. She worked by lamplight in barns and sheds, arriving after dark and leaving before dawn. Her reputation spread beyond Cedar Ridge as ranchers discovered her expertise. The success only fueled more resentment. Wade convinced the town council to investigate whether Sophia was practicing medicine without proper licensing. Sheriff Collins made half-hearted inquiries, but found no laws specifically preventing veterinary treatment. Late one night, Lawson found Sophia sitting on the porch steps, staring at the stars. She held the Tribune letters in her lap, creased from multiple readings. "There's something I need to tell you." Her voice carried a weight that made his stomach clench. He'd grown to depend on her steady presence, her quiet confidence in the face of every crisis. "I wasn't entirely truthful about why I left Boston." She told him about Dr. Whitmore, the stolen research, the false charges that had forced her to flee. She explained how her mentor had promised to protect her career, then betrayed that trust to advance his own reputation. "I came west because I thought I was a fugitive. I believed those charges would follow me forever." The Tribune investigation had cleared her name completely. Whitmore faced criminal charges and academic disgrace. Several universities wanted to offer her positions. The scientific community now recognized her work as groundbreaking. "They're offering me everything I've ever wanted." Lawson absorbed this revelation in silence. The woman he'd thought was desperate and hiding had been vindicated by the most respected newspaper in Colorado. She could have any career she chose, anywhere she wanted. "When do you leave?" "I haven't decided yet." But her hesitation told him everything. This was the opportunity she'd sacrificed everything to earn. He couldn't ask her to give it up for a struggling ranch and a grieving widower. The next morning brought fresh disasters. Someone had cut the irrigation ditches, flooding the north pasture and drowning the new grass. The chicken coop showed signs of forced entry, though nothing was stolen. Tools were scattered across the yard as if thrown from the barn loft. Sophia documented everything with her usual thoroughness. She measured footprints, analyzed damage patterns, and cataloged missing items. Her scientific approach revealed details that casual observation would miss. 3 different people did this. The footprints don't match. One person cut the ditches, another ransacked the barn, a third disturbed the chickens. Wade's organized a campaign. He's trying to drive up costs and labor while damaging our reputation. If we can't maintain the ranch properly, we'll lose credibility with our customers. The strategy was working. Several neighbors canceled appointments for animal treatment. The general store began delaying supply deliveries. Even Martha Jennings grew nervous about public association with them. Sophia faced an impossible choice: stay and fight a battle that might destroy both their futures, or accept vindication and success that would take her away from the man she'd grown to love. The Tribune wanted an answer within the week. Wade's harassment showed no signs of stopping, and Lawson watched her with growing sadness, knowing she'd already made her decision. Wade delivered his ultimatum on a Friday morning. He rode up to the house with Sheriff Collins in tow, his face set with grim satisfaction. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but stayed mounted behind Wade's shoulder. 24 hours, Hargrove. Either she's gone by tomorrow night or you'll face the consequences. Lawson stepped onto the porch, his hand resting near the rifle propped against the door frame. What consequences would those be? Legal action. I've filed complaints about unlicensed medical practice and public nuisance. The circuit judge arrives Monday morning. Sheriff Collins shifted in his saddle. The complaints are official, Lawson. I have to investigate. Investigate what? Healing sick animals. Operating outside the law. Practicing veterinary medicine without proper territorial licensing. Wade's smile showed cold satisfaction. No judge will side with you once he hears the full story. A decent woman wouldn't be living unmarried with a man, treating animals like some kind of witch doctor. The words hung in the air like poison. Lawson felt his temper rising but forced himself to stay calm. Losing control now would only strengthen Wade's position. The Tribune expects my answer by Monday, Sophia said quietly from the doorway. Perhaps that's for the best. Wade's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What's the Tribune got to do with anything? They've offered me a position in Denver. The revelation clearly surprised Wade. He'd expected a desperate woman with no options. Learning about her professional opportunities disrupted his carefully planned confrontation. Then take it and spare us all this nonsense. After they rode away, Lawson and Sophia sat in heavy silence. The ultimatum had forced a decision neither was ready to make. She could leave with dignity and success, or stay and face legal battles that might destroy them both. The offer's too good to refuse, Lawson said finally. You'd be foolish to stay. Would I? Her question carried deeper meaning. They'd both felt the growing connection between them, the partnership that had evolved beyond mere convenience. But love couldn't overcome the practical realities they faced. I won't ask you to sacrifice your career for this place. What if I want to sacrifice it? The confession hung between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Lawson reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. I love you, Sophia, but I can't protect you from what's coming. Then we face it together. Saturday brought a flurry of activity. Wade had spread word about the ultimatum, dividing the town into opposing camps. Some supported his position, viewing Sophia's presence as a threat to proper social order. Others quietly admired her competence and questioned Wade's motives. Martha Jennings arrived at noon with fresh bread and urgent news. The circuit judge is Wade's brother-in-law. He'll rule against you no matter what evidence you present. The information confirmed their worst fears. Wade hadn't just filed complaints, he'd rigged the outcome. They faced a legal battle they couldn't possibly win through conventional means. There might be another way, Sophia said thoughtfully. The Tribune journalist who wrote about my case, he's traveling through Colorado documenting territorial politics. She'd maintained correspondence with James Morrison, the reporter who'd investigated Dr. Whitmore. He was currently in Denver, researching corruption in territorial courts. A story about judicial bias and racial prejudice would interest him greatly. They sent a telegram that afternoon, outlining their situation and Wade's connections to the circuit judge. Morrison's response came within hours. He would arrive Sunday night to document the proceedings. Public scrutiny changes everything, Sophia explained. Wade can control local opinion, but he can't manipulate a newspaper with statewide circulation. Saturday night, they talked until dawn, not about strategies or legal tactics, but about their feelings and fears. Lawson described his marriage to Martha, how grief had nearly destroyed him after her death. Sophia shared her struggles in Boston, the constant battle to prove her competence in a man's profession. I never expected to find this, she said, a place where I could use my skills without apology, even with all the trouble it's caused. Especially because of the trouble. Standing up for something worthwhile makes it more precious. Sunday brought unexpected support. Ranchers from neighboring counties began arriving in town, drawn by word of the proceedings. Many had heard about Sophia's veterinary work and came to see the outcome. Their presence suggested the case had implications beyond Cedar Ridge. Morrison arrived on the evening train, a thin man with sharp eyes and a notebook always in hand. He interviewed Sophia extensively, documenting her credentials and the harassment she'd endured. He seemed particularly interested in Wade's financial interests and political connections. Corruption makes good copy, he told them, especially when it involves suppressing scientific progress. Monday morning dawned clear and cold. The courthouse filled beyond capacity with ranchers, townspeople, and curious observers from distant settlements. Wade looked confident until he noticed Morrison's presence and the number of unfamiliar faces in the crowd. Judge Franklin Wade, Clayton's brother-in-law, took the bench with obvious irritation. He'd expected a simple local matter, not a packed courtroom with newspaper coverage. Morrison sat prominently in the front row, his pencil moving constantly across his notepad. The moment of truth had arrived. Sophia faced a choice between accepting vindication in Denver or fighting for her right to practice in Colorado. The packed courtroom waited for her decision. Whatever happened next would determine not just their futures, but set precedent for other women seeking professional recognition in the territorial courts. Judge Franklin Wade called the court to order with visible discomfort. The packed courtroom buzzed with tension as Morrison's pencil scratched across his notepad. What should have been a simple local hearing had become a territorial spectacle. Clayton Wade presented his case with polished confidence. He argued that unlicensed medical practice threatened public safety. He painted Sophia as an unqualified fraud taking advantage of desperate ranchers. His witnesses testified about proper licensing procedures and territorial regulations. This woman has no legal authority to treat animals in Colorado territory. Her presence undermines legitimate veterinary practitioners and endangers livestock throughout the region. Judge Wade nodded approvingly throughout the presentation. His bias was obvious to everyone except himself. Morrison documented every gesture, every leading question, every instance of judicial favoritism. When Sophia's turn came, she rose with quiet dignity. Instead of defending her qualifications, she did something unexpected. She called her first witness. I call Thomas Morrison, cattle rancher from Pueblo County. A weathered man stood from the gallery. He'd ridden 3 days to testify about the mare Sophia had saved from colic during her travels west. Without her intervention, he would have lost his most valuable breeding stock. Next, I call Samuel Hendricks from Grand Junction. Another rancher testified about sheep Sophia had treated for parasites, saving his entire flock from destruction. His detailed account contradicted Wade's claims about public endangerment. One by one, ranchers from across Colorado Territory took the stand. Each told similar stories of professional competence and successful treatment. Their collective testimony painted Sophia not as a dangerous fraud, but as a skilled practitioner whose work had saved thousands of dollars in livestock. Martha Jennings testified about her milk cow. The preacher's wife described her rooster's recovery. Even Sheriff Collins admitted under oath that no complaints had been filed about Sophia's treatments until Wade began his campaign. Clayton Wade's face darkened as witness after witness contradicted his narrative. He'd expected a simple character assassination, not a parade of satisfied customers praising Sophia's expertise. "I object to this circus," he called out. "These people aren't qualified to judge veterinary competence." Sophia smiled calmly. "Then perhaps you'd like to hear from someone who is." She produced her diploma from Boston College of Veterinary Medicine, her license to practice in Massachusetts, and letters of recommendation from 3 prominent Eastern veterinarians. Morrison had helped her gather additional documentation through telegraph correspondence with Boston. The papers passed through the courtroom like wildfire. Ranchers who could barely read examined the official seals and stamps with reverence. Here was proof that their faith in Sophia's abilities had been justified. Judge Wade tried to dismiss the credentials as irrelevant to territorial law, but Morrison stood and addressed the court directly. "Your Honor, I'm James Morrison of the Denver Tribune. I'm documenting this case for statewide publication. Territorial residents have a right to know how their courts handle matters of professional competence and civil rights." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Any obvious bias would be reported across Colorado Territory. Judge Wade's comfortable position suddenly seemed precarious. Sophia took the stand in her own defense. She described her education methodically, detailing courses in anatomy, pathology, and surgical techniques. She explained her research into livestock diseases and her publications in Eastern veterinary journals. "I came west seeking the freedom to practice my profession without artificial barriers. I've harmed no one and helped many. The only crime I've committed is challenging assumptions about what women can accomplish." Clayton Wade cross-examined aggressively, trying to portray her as an uppity outsider disrupting community harmony. But every attack only highlighted her dignity and competence. The packed courtroom watched a respected businessman bully a woman whose only offense was professional excellence. The tide turned completely when Sophia announced her decision about the Tribune's job offer. "The Denver Tribune has offered me a position as their territorial science correspondent. I would document agricultural innovations throughout Colorado, helping ranchers improve their practices. I propose to accept this position while maintaining my practice here in Cedar Ridge." Morrison nodded confirmation. The offer was real and generous. Sophia would gain statewide recognition while continuing her local work. It was a solution that satisfied everyone except Wade and his supporters. Judge Wade found himself trapped between family loyalty and public scrutiny. Ruling against Sophia now would appear vindictive and corrupt. Morrison's presence guaranteed that any obvious bias would become front-page news across the territory. The court finds no evidence of public endangerment or fraudulent practice. The complaints are dismissed. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Ranchers who'd traveled hundreds of miles to testify surrounded Sophia with congratulations. Even some of Wade's former supporters seemed relieved by the outcome. Clayton Wade stormed from the courthouse, his political ambitions damaged by the public humiliation. His campaign against Sophia had backfired spectacularly, revealing him as petty and vindictive. That evening, Lawson found Sophia on the porch where their relationship had begun months earlier. The legal victory had secured her right to practice, but questions remained about their personal future. "The Tribune position means travel throughout the territory. I'll be gone weeks at a time. We'll make it work. There's something else." She turned to face him directly. They want me to document the first female veterinary practice in Colorado territory. That means staying here permanently, not just until something better comes along. Lawson understood the implication. She was choosing him and Cedar Ridge over safer opportunities elsewhere. The decision humbled and thrilled him simultaneously. Then I guess I should make this official. He dropped to one knee, producing a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. Will you marry me, Dr. Reed? Her acceptance sealed more than their personal commitment. It represented a victory for progress over prejudice, competence over convention. Their wedding 3 months later drew guests from across the territory, including several couples who'd found courage to follow unconventional paths. The ranch prospered under their combined management. Sophia's articles in the Tribune brought national attention to Colorado's agricultural innovations. Their success inspired other educated women to seek opportunities in the growing territory. Years later, when other interracial couples faced hostility in neighboring towns, they found refuge and support in Cedar Ridge. Sophia and Lawson's courage had planted seeds of tolerance that grew into lasting change.